welcome back to On the Ball, the podcast series from the Vanderbilt Sports and Society Initiative. I'm Andrew Maraniss, and I'm very excited that our guest today is Nick Cormier. He's joining us from California, where he is the founder and editor-in-chief of the Fabric of Culture. And we're going to get into connections between sports and fashion. Now, the Substack that you write is not just about connections between sports and fashion, but you do write quite a bit about that. Before starting this venture, you'd been with corporate roles with UPS and Fox and Live Nation, Boston Consulting Group. I know you went to University of Michigan as an undergrad and got your master's at Vanderbilt's Owen School of Management. So there is that Vanderbilt connection. But Nick, welcome to the podcast.
Andrew, thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this conversation. It's a little different than others that we've had here, but the whole idea of the Sports and Society Initiative is to really look at the ways that sports intersects with all sorts of aspects, different aspects of culture, and fashion certainly is one of those, and sports marketing really is one of those too, which and the connections between fashion and marketing I know is a real interest of yours. So you came onto my radar when you were in town a few weeks ago. There was the CAA, the big sports agency, World Congress of Sports. And it was really a who's who in the sports world. We're in town for that, including the commissioner of baseball, Rob Manfred. And you asked him a question that was a little bit different than the questions he was getting from the sports or baseball media that were there. So I thought that might be a good intro into this conversation we're going to have. Like, why were you there? Why did you ask him the question? What was the response you got?
Yeah, definitely. So it was that, admittedly, that was my first sports conference. So generally, the things that I travel to are very fashion focused, but just looking at the state of fashion right now and how it blends into so many different industries, I just felt it was important to go. And I also saw the lineup that they had and decided to shoot my shot and say like, hey, I'd love to go and get to talk to people and made some pretty incredible connections while I was there. But was gracious enough to be let into the media room since I was there for with a press pass. And it was funny because it was Rob and probably 15 to 20 other journalists. So it was a pretty intimate setting, and everybody was asking about the pitch clock and how the game is played. And the hot topic right now is Nashville going to get an MLB team ever? And so I really had a question about them renewing their Ralph Lauren's partnership. And so I asked it, and it was really funny because the room almost went silent as soon as I asked the question, and everybody kind of turned around, and it was the record stop. But yeah, I mean, it was one of those things I've always felt where if you have access to a room, you should utilize it for your own benefit and be able to contribute. And it was a really important question. The MLB has partnered with Ralph Lauren before, and they saw a massive success with it, and they decided to run it back and do it again. So I just wanted to kind of understand from his perspective, like why was this of interest to them, and is this something that they're gonna start doing a lot more often? So, but no, I think he also appreciated it because it was a very different question out of the ones he was getting bombarded with.
Right. All right. So I want to get into more of the sort of the issues at play when it comes to sports and fashion. But I'm curious, like, how did you get interested in this marriage of worlds in the first place? I know your dad played college basketball. You grew up a Spurs fan, you told me, but how did the interest in sports develop, and then how did the interest in the fashion world or the sports marketing world develop for you?
Yeah, definitely. Sports has always been a big role in my life. Like you mentioned, my dad played college basketball. His claim to fame is we have a picture of him shooting over Larry Bird. So
All right.
grew up in a very big basketball household. Went to countless Spurs games growing up in San Antonio, and have been a Spurs fan since Tim Duncan and David Robinson, Avery Johnson. I joke and say I knew Steve Kerr as a Spur, as a player before he was a coach.
Okay.
Yeah, like sports has always been important. Going to Michigan, massive sports school. That's when I got really deep into college football. And yeah, like my sports fandom has just kind of grown over the years and branched out into different sports and leagues globally. So that had always kind of been there. And growing up, I'd played almost every sport imaginable except football. My parents were very against that. But
Mhm.
fashion, I'd say, had developed. let's call it like around the time I finished at Owen, I was starting to get more and more interested in it. And at one point, I actually thought I wanted to start a fashion brand and started going down that route. And I think it's one of those ideas where I decided to put it on hold and pursue it later on. But once I started this blog and started writing a lot more, that intersection is obviously really popular. And just wanting to be able to cover it and stay up to date with everything that's going on.
So when we're talking about the connections between sports and fashion, there's a lot of different ways that one could look at that. Sort of the athletic leisure wear that people are wearing more and more. There's the fashion that the athletes themselves, what they're wearing and how that is now through social media, such an important part of building their brand. There's the brands themselves and choosing to partner with leagues, like the example you had of Ralph Lauren in Major League Baseball. So where does your interest lie within all of that, or is it all of the above?
It's a little all of the above, right? I mean, you think about how big of an industry fashion is, and when I say fashion, it's not necessarily all the luxury fashion brands, right? Like there is a stylistic aspect to all the athletic brands, like you look at what New Balance and brands like Kith and Emilion Dior are doing. You look at Jordan has a whole streetwear aspect to it, and it's not just for performance. So I think there's just so much to cover. And like you said, brands sponsoring athletes. I personally am really excited to see, some of the up and coming brands, once they get a little bit more budget, and really start getting into the zeitgeist, how they'll be able to pull in athletes and start a sports marketing strategy themselves. So, yeah, I think to your point, there's just so much to cover. And for me, it's always really interesting, especially around the sponsorship side. Oh, like this is a player, he's all about X, Y, and Z off the court, off the field. And that's a perfect marriage for, this brand. So yeah,
Mhm.
I think my interest has always been kind of spanning across the entire gamut.
Okay, one of the articles you've written most recently for your Substack is on the WNBA and some partnerships it has with major brands like Coach and Prada. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening there and the story you just wrote?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, if we're calling a spade, like women have really owned fashion for years and years, and the guys are just starting to catch up. And I think that combined with the fact that the WNBA is having an explosion in popularity, because of a lot of the up and comers, I think brands are really just trying to take advantage of that. And so basically what I was writing in the article was just kind of outlining some of the different like interesting deals and partnerships. So Off-White, for example, is the official style curator of the New York Liberty. And for those of you who don't know who are watching this, Off-White is a streetwear brand that was started by the infamous Virgil Abloh, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but very, very famous black designer who has been incredibly influential, in the things that he did while he was still with us. So you have them. Coach is the official handbag partner of the league now. So really excited for that. Prada wasn't an official sponsorship. It was just that Caitlin Clark was a massive fan. And so, while she's not, again, an official brand ambassador, I think there's a lot of interesting things that they can do if they want to continue to pursue that route. So yeah, it was more so just kind of seeing, oh, like what are the really big brands that are deciding to invest more money in women's professional sports.
Okay. Um, and WNBA and popularity of women's basketball right now sort of seems like the it story of the moment in some ways, but these connections between sports and apparel brands or athletes and brands, sports and fashion, is it an entirely new phenomenon or like are there some historic examples of these connections?
Yeah, so there are and I want to be very careful to not say this was the first. It was more of, this is the first that I'm familiar with, but I really think when we talk about high fashion specifically, it was David Beckham and Giorgio Armani. I think the two of them, I think that was one of the kind of the biggest partnerships that I want to consider one of the first to date. And then, since then it's really grown. I think the other example that somebody could argue is when Michael Jordan came to Nike. And obviously very similar to any other athlete, it started with a shoe, but now he has one of the most lucrative apparel brands in the world now, right? So that could technically be, depending on how you want to say like sponsorship versus, he created his own lines and so on and so forth. So those are the two really early ones, and then we see where things are today, and I think almost any major athlete that wants to get more into fashion, it's very easy for them to come together with their manager and agent and kind of figure out like, hey, like this is who I really want to partner with. And obviously there's some outbound activity as well from the brand side once they decide to start figuring out who they want to sponsor, whether it's an athlete, a team, or a league.
So there's an aspect to this that's almost like it makes me smile in a way. Like you think about the typical football fan, like the image you might have in your mind is like just a guy with a hot dog and a beer and a jersey, right? Like there's zero fashion sense necessarily associated with that guy. On the other hand, we're talking about Armani, right? Or these high fashion brands that are associating with sports. Like, is this an attempt to kind of change that existing guy with his hot dog and his beer, or is it an attempt to reach out to a whole new audience? Like, what's the appeal to a high fashion brand to a sports fan, or is the sports fan not even their target market?
Yeah, so if we really sit down and think about it, I think B2B, like, and I'm going to use this as an example, right? We talk about B2B marketing. There, like, for the most part, you have a persona of like, hey, like these IT executives are the people that we really want to speak to and really want to ring out our brand. A lot of B2B companies are having a sports marketing arm because, after a lot of research, they realize, hey, in their spare time, IT executives really love golf. They really love basketball. And so that's why you see the Adobes of the world. Dropbox has an F1 sponsorship right now. So I think a lot of companies are realizing, hey, in people's free time, they're much more than just what they're doing for work. And I think that's what luxury brands are really seeing with their customers or people they want to get customers or even their aspirational customers. I think in society today, we have a very interesting and sometimes negative and toxic parasocial relationships with these athletes, just because of how fandom has grown. And I think brands just really want to take advantage of that. So I think it's a few things. I think it's number one, so like I can take myself as an example. I'm not at the point yet in my career where I'm able to, go into Louis Vuitton all the time and have a ton of pieces from multiple collections. But I would consider myself like an aspirational shopper where, I might decide to get something on the lower price point because I have an affiliation or like an affinity towards Louis Vuitton. And because I grew up a Spurs fan, and you see Victor Wembanyama as one of their brand ambassadors, for me that's huge, and I'm like, oh, like now I'm an even bigger Louis Vuitton fan, right? So I think you're getting the people who can or someday will be able to and want to be able to purchase from that brand and really looping them into their brand universe. I also think you're introducing sports fans who, might be more interested in streetwear to kind of get them to have a better understanding of what high fashion is all about. Or maybe the opposite, right? You have, some of the more expensive streetwear brands that, they want to grab folks that are kind of only playing in the high fashion world. And then overall, I think it's all about an awareness play. All these brands want to continue to control their narrative, and that's exactly how they're doing it. Just to kind of not only switch things up, but get more eyeballs out there, be able to tap into a different audience, and I think that's what they're primarily looking at doing.
Okay. when we talk about, brand awareness, there was a quote that I saw in an article. I think it was in Vogue maybe, and it said, "Sports stars are the new Hollywood stars." And this was the founder of Skims that mentioned this, And so maybe in the past we look to those actors and actresses, like what are they wearing, for examples for the rest of the culture, and eventually it worked its way down. Like, why have athletes, or do you agree with that? And why have athletes replaced? Why are they the new Hollywood stars?
Yeah, so and obviously this is not a knock to anybody in Hollywood,
Right.
because they're still creating, incredibly wonderful TV and television and movies. But I like to think about it. 30 for 30 and Hard Knocks walked, so all the the programs that we see right now could run. Apple TV, Amazon Prime, Netflix, these massive streamers that have like tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in top line revenue. These are people, these are companies who, or I shouldn't say top line revenue, but like are investing billions of dollars in this space. These are companies that say like, hey, there is a lot of value because people want to not only see more footage of athletes, but they want to get to know them and who they are. I think when Quarterback came out on Netflix 2 years ago, and it was really profiling some of the biggest names in the NFL, it's like, oh, like this is what this person is like. My friends and I joke around because obviously Kirk Cousins is a Michigan State guy, but you follow him and his wife and kids, and he's just like, man, like this is one of like the most down to earth Midwest. Like, man, like I'd love to grab a beer with him. He just seems super laid back and very unfazed by this lifestyle. And so like I think that was really cool to see. Netflix is also getting into live sports with and I can't remember the name, but they just sponsored a golf tournament that they casted live. I know I want to say it's Peacock is getting into the professional and college sports as well. Amazon Prime was showing Monday Night Football. So yeah, I think it's just further exposure because people just want to consume sports much more than the limited 4 to 6 month season that we're normally getting.
Right. And these athletes on the field are wearing, in most sports, a uniform. Maybe golf or tennis, they might be wearing a brand on the field. But we're seeing so much more social media content or shots, during a pregame show of athletes entering the building, like these tunnel shots. The tunnel fit has become a thing. For those who aren't familiar with that idea, can you share a little bit like about it, and why has this become such a phenomenon across the sports world?
Yeah, definitely. So before Adam Silver, David Stern was very strict on what you could wear. He was I like, very much admire him for what he did for the league, but he was very old school and said like, hey, when you're coming in, for a game, athletes, if not wearing a full suit and tie, should be, at least like a button down or, slacks, or he was trying to push that as much as he could. And as soon as he left, the rules around that really became a lot more lax. And over the years, that's how it has developed into something so big. I'm not sure exactly who the first few people who were really kind of experimenting in it. But as you can see in the especially in the NFL, but definitely in the NBA now as well. I think it's another opportunity because these athletes know the camera is always on them, but as soon as they enter the arena or even from the parking lot, the paparazzi is snapping pictures. And so, especially when you think about athletes wanting to consider themselves as a brand, it's a little negative because it's like the feeling of quite literally always being on, but it's, hey, how do I want to portray myself in the world? And I think this is just another touch point. So I mean, you have some athletes that are all about it, and they take a lot of time and effort into what they're putting on before every single game. But then you also have people like Jason Kelsey, who is very much like, hey, I'm just here to play. I'm focused on the game. I don't care if I'm wearing flip-flops and shorts. So it's a very personal decision, but I think over the years we've definitely seen a lot more and more athletes put a lot more time and effort into it.
Yeah, I saw Jason Tatum said he has three stylists that work together, to coordinate what he's going to wear. Is that an outlier? Is that common? I mean, how much time and effort are professional athletes putting into their look?
I think it heavily depends, and I hate giving the consulting answer. It depends, but
Right.
it's very dependent on the player. So again, there's some players like Jason Tatum where it's like, hey, like I need multiple vibes, based on this game, and so I think it really just depends. Some people have one stylist kind of take care of all their needs. You might have some stylists that are, kind of more specialized in the streetwear everyday looks versus like, hey, like I want to, get a suit and, like really dress up. So I think it completely depends
Okay.
on number one, how much free time they have. Because I do know there's so many athletes that are doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes, whether they have their own foundation, they have their own brand, they're doing a lot more and they have their own businesses. Like, Giannis launched his media company, I want to say either early this year, or late last year. So, yeah, I mean, if they have the time and they're interested enough in it, they're definitely going to make sure to come correct when it comes to tunnel fits.
All right. So there's also like the press conference fits too, and I think Cam Newton, depending how you look at it, is like very fashion forward or like kind of ridiculous. Some of the hats that he might wear. Like, are there athletes that you think do this especially well, or have there been any like real fashion fails out there that you took note of?
Yeah, so it's difficult because number one, fashion is very subjective. So I'm hesitant to say, who was a fail because especially when you start segmenting opinions by age, like
Right.
my parents and baby boomers are going to look at fits very differently that myself and my friends and colleagues as millennials than, what some of my younger peers as Gen Z are going to think about it, right? But for there has been a slight resounding of agreement with some of the fits that Kyle Kuzma and Russell Westbrook have worn. But again, these are also two people who love fashion so much, they're willing to be experimental
Yeah.
and try dramatically new things. And these are also quite frankly people who say like, "Hey, I think this looks good," or "Hey, I'm gonna try it out. If it works, great. If not, on to the next one." So these are definitely some of the thickest skinned people and are not going to get offended if the media is just saying like, "Oh my God, what was this guy even wearing?" So, but that being said, Kyle Kuzma actually had said he will not be participating in the tunnel fits anymore. I think he's realized that I put so much time and effort into this over the years and I want to try something new. So he's had a few lines. I want to say with Puma and a few other companies, I believe. So I wouldn't be surprised if he tried launching his own thing sometime soon. I'm a big Honor the Gift fan, which is Russell Westbrook's brand. I have several pieces in my closet from him, but I think he dresses incredibly well and has also been to the Met Gala and several fashion weeks around the world. Who else? LeBron James. That man is always in Louis Vuitton something. When he was in the finals with Cleveland, had Tom Brown, the designer, design like an entire like custom suit for the entire team. So definitely I would consider him. I'm trying to think who else.
I saw
Lewis
Shea
Hamilton.
Gilgeous-Alexander is mentioned quite a
Oh,
bit.
SGA is absolutely up there. He's been interviewed by GQ, I don't know how many times about his style. Lewis Hamilton, obviously a racer, but there is nobody touching him in the world of F1 when it comes to style. Trying to think of who else in football. Russell Wilson, I think, is incredibly fashionable. Also has his own company, Goodman brand, that's direct to consumer as well as is sold in places like Nordstrom. So yeah, I think there's a lot of people. Then you also have people like Justin Fields, who is, I wouldn't say necessarily like, a ton of companies are, like he's a brand ambassador for a bunch of people, but he just dresses very well. If you go on his Instagram, he just knows how to put very simple fits together very well. So yeah, I mean, honestly, it's quite a few people across a lot of different leagues that are doing this really well.
What have you observed about the connections between race and fashion and sports marketing? And most of the names that have been mentioned are African American athletes. There haven't always been equal or equitable opportunities for Black athletes to receive endorsement deals, but it appears that maybe that's different in these fashion connections. I don't know. Like, what do you make of those connections right now?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I think it's really interesting to see the difference because I think it is like more so a factor of these brands waking up and realizing, number one, like this is a missed opportunity. But then number two, like, hey, like they have a massive following and they've kind of created this aura about them or their personality and that's just wanting to get more alignment with them. So obviously very happy that anytime any Black athlete gets his or her shine in terms of like another deal or sponsorship. I think that's always like really great for the community, just in terms of representation. Because if you look at sports, tons and tons of Black and brown athletes, but then you go into fashion and there's very few of us. You have Olivier, I can't think of his name. One of the big fashion designers at Balmain, and he's been the creative director for years. And then you have Pharrell, who's championing Louis Vuitton men's, but there's just not a lot of us in that space, and so I think to have Black athletes who are your brand ambassador, who you're bringing over in some of these spaces to really say like, hey, we want you to be either one of the faces of the brand overall or the face of our men's line, of our women's line. So I love it. And it's also really interesting because you have such a big disparity between, let's say, the NBA and the NFL and the NHL. I haven't necessarily dived too deep, but they're very much like, oh yeah, like we're suit and tie, like that's how we dress up before games. If you look at their tunnel fits, it's very kind of one lane, and it's no knock to any NHL player, but it's just something that they either, don't think is important or they just haven't gotten to the point where, the league is really embracing those types of deals and sponsorships.
Okay. Um, I want the most best dressed guy that I know in Nashville is Dr. Andre Churchwell, who's uh amazing doctor at Nashville and has been an administrator at Vanderbilt. Um, I asked him once, and he's been featured in USA Today and for his fashion sense. I asked him like, where did that come from? And he said it goes back to his dad, who was a pioneering Black journalist in Nashville at the Nashville Banner, and that he would wear coat and tie and a trench coat everywhere he went. This was during the civil rights era, and to him, that dressing well was an armor almost, to against the racism that he was encountering every day, and that by looking good, and that maybe this is respectability politics in a sense, but but there was a level of respect that may come because of that tie or because of that trench coat, and that was the lesson that Dr. Churchwell learned, and it was just a part of sense of pride in himself, his family. And I wondered if there are aspects to that. There was a quote that I read from, I think in the same article said, you can be a vessel, you can be a shield, you can make armor, you empower them. That's what fashion can do for sport. I wondered if there's an aspect showing up for this big game, coming through the tunnel in what you're wearing, like makes you feel good, makes you play good. Like, I wonder if there are connections there beyond, that relate to the performance on the court, but also just in terms of self-confidence, and sending a message to the world where the spotlight is on you.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think you answered part of that question. I've always believed that when you look good, you feel good, and it's not always about what logo someone is wearing, but it's the feeling and emotion that arises from somebody who like looks in the mirror after they're dressed and has a smile on their face, like a sense of pride inside of themselves, and saying like, yeah, like I feel good, like I'm ready to tackle the day. So even in our own lives, like you have a big meeting, you put a suit on, it's like, hey, like let's go crush this. If it's a VC trying to pitch a startup, like whatever they decide to wear, like all these different micro events where something big is coming up and say like, hey, I need to look a certain way. Not only in terms of how I'm presenting myself to other people, but how I want to make myself feel. And I think that's exactly what a lot of these athletes are doing. Sure, you have a lot of athletes that, are like, oh, like I just want to sport the things with a logo, even if it is quiet luxury, like the subtleties you can tell like certain things are from certain brands. But I think above that, it's just like, hey, like I want to put something on today, like before this big game I have, whether it's a regular season game or game seven in the final, like in the playoffs. People want to do something that is gonna like give them that personal edge. So it's like, hey, like I need to make sure I'm firing on all cylinders, and part of that is making sure I feel good by how I look. So if like that would be my overall guess in terms of relating what's happening right now in the sports world to that quote.
Okay. So as I mentioned, your blog is about more than just connections between sports and fashion. Um, First of all, how can people follow you? Tell us where to find your Substack, and what are some other issues out there that are of interest to you right now that you've been writing about or that you're working on right now?
Yeah, definitely. So if anybody wants to find me, it is on Substack. So if you are a Substack user, you can just search the fabric of culture. Or if you want to just go to the website directly, it's thefabricofculture.com. So I've made that kind of streamlined and really easy to be found. But yeah, in terms of what I write about, I think that was one of the reasons why I kind of love this solopreneur journey is because I get to call the shots and say, hey, like this is what I want to write about. So obviously it is striking a balance between, things that I enjoy and I'm really passionate about, but then also kind of looking at the numbers and saying, hey, what are the kind of articles that are really resonating with people? What are the topics? And also blending that with what's happening from a current event perspective. So, I wrote an article a few weeks ago about Saks Fifth Avenue and how they are not treating their vendors really well. A couple years ago, they started getting behind on a lot of their payments, where the industry standard is net 30 and getting vendors paid within a month. And they were so behind. Some companies hadn't received their payment for 6 months. And sure, you have some of the massive brands that, like that's more of like a frustration than anything. But then you also have, some mid-tier and even emerging brands that like, hey, this is our first wholesale motion. And to be able to put this much product out when we have to put money up front to actually get them manufactured and not receiving our payments on time, that makes for some not just really hard conversations, but you put someone's business at risk when they don't have the same type of cash flow that you do or credit options. So like that's an example. I've written about the really interesting segue of luxury brands wanting to go more into experiences. And I mean, and that's everything from companies like Kith, ALD, Human Race, and a few others having like coffee shops within their retail spaces, all the way through Lacoste doing a partnership with one of the hotels in the French Riviera because that hotel specifically has a beautiful tennis court. And Lacoste wanting to go deeper into their tennis roots. So it's a little bit, and I've also profiled big names, past and present within the industry from a historical perspective. So, and then I'm also starting to dive a little bit deeper into interviews. And actually, after you and I finish up, I'm actually going to be interviewing Zernell Gilly. He is one of the few black perfumers that is really hot right now in terms of everybody talking about his products. So it's a little bit of everything. And then I'm actually heading to Barcelona in a week and a half to go to Shop Talk Europe, which is one of the biggest retail conferences in the region, and there I'll be able to chat with brands from all over the world and just get their take on what challenges they're struggling with, things that they've found a lot of success in terms of strategies or products. So yeah, it's a little bit of everything, but what I can promise anybody who's thinking about subscribing and tuning in is you will not be disappointed in terms of the quality, but also the variety of topics.
Yeah, well, as illustrated by this interview. So, Nick, thank you so much for taking the time to join the show today. Really interesting what you're doing, you're following your passions and what you love to do, and going deep on a topic that in some ways is top of mind in some cases, but unexplored in other ways, in these connections between sports and fashion. So again, Nick, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Andrew. Really appreciate it. Enjoyed it as well.